I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, this is Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch, joined by my co-host, Dr. Patrick Wyman. We say welcome to the Ruckle. It's time for a few chuckles and a long, hard look at the work of Bobby Knuckles. Again, this is Heavy Hands. We are looking back at UFC 213 and UFC International Fight Week. Most importantly...
That was so good. That was so good.
I got to use the word Ruckle. So, most importantly, UFC International Fight Weekend. We had Justin Gaethje versus Michael Johnson, which was mind-blowingly fun. We had Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero, replacing the original main event of Nunes Shevchenko. It's hard for me to imagine a title fight being more satisfying than that fight ended up being. Even though some of the mid-card things were a little slow and some of the fights weren't satisfying, we had two absolutely memorable main events from this weekend, and we are looking forward to breaking it down for you today. Before we get into that, Pat, I want to ask you if you have a take on Amanda Nunes pulling out of the fight. Because everybody's got their various, hot takes on how that works and what it is. I mean, for me, I kind of find it hard to be upset about it because I was so happy with Romero Whittaker. Like, it was so good that I'm not really upset that we didn't get another fight after. I'm not sure I would have been able to give another fight the enjoyment it deserved. It was like when Melendez-Thompson 3 happened on the Strikeforce Nashville, maybe, before Barnett-Cormier. And Barnett-Cormier was a good fight, but I was worn out because the fight before it was so amazing. I was really happy with Whittaker Romero. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah. So even without knowing that Romero Whittaker was going to turn out to be a really, really good fight, knowing what it was now, it doesn't bother me that she pulled out.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the UFC isn't going to take care of her for that. We're not going to pay her off and say, oh, you stepped up and did us a solid. They don't give a shit. If she loses, she loses, and they're going to knock her back down to 50 to show and 50 to win or something like that. The only person who's going to take care of Amanda Nunes' career is Amanda Nunes. The UFC isn't going to do it. And stepping out there, obviously compromised, if you go to the hospital and they have to prescribe you with medications and you feel like hell, then no, you really shouldn't fight.
Yeah.
That's a terrible idea. And I understand there are going to be people who compare this to, showing up for work or whatever. I fucking hate that metaphor because you know what work is for her? Is showing up to the gym.
Yeah.
That's work. She has gotten up and shown up to work. She's gotten up in the morning. She's rolled out of bed. She has gone to work for the last 3 months getting ready for this fight. This is one thing. This is not equivalent to that. This is the point where metaphors and analogies with other things, other occupations, other things like that, they break down. It doesn't make sense because you're not stepping in there with all of your future earnings on the line with physically compromised and unable to perform. I think those kinds of criticisms, I have zero patience for them. And they're generally coming from people whose opinions I think are dog shit anyway. So
it's sort of they're obviously part of what made Whittaker's performance against Romero, and of course we will talk about that very soon, so impressive is the fact that he was injured pretty grievously. I imagine the way he was talking about the instability of his knee probably tore a couple major ligaments in there, if not completely, and that made it more impressive what he was able to do. But I think it really sucks when people turn around. We know that fighting through adversity, fighting when you're sick and still performing, that is remarkable and it deserves praise. But not doing that does not deserve condemnation, right? It's a little like receiving Christmas gifts and opening all your boxes, and then when you're done, you say, is this it? What else did you get me? You know what I mean? We can't expect Amanda Nunes to go out there risking her belt, risking her health and safety when she's feeling shitty. I really can't be upset about it. It would have been impressive if she did it and still won, but it would have sucked for her if she did it and lost. And I can't say that I expect her to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is also not to just drift purely into ad hominem stuff, but like really and truly, the people who are pushing the "she didn't show up to work" narrative are generally people with bad opinions anyway.
Well, I mean, they're the kind of people who worship Dana White. So.
Well, not just that. They're also people who have a particular kind of attitude toward fighters in general that I don't especially care for.
Yeah.
And Ben Askren, whom I also think just is proven himself to have really bad opinions about pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So like. It's stuff like that, and so the identity of the messengers in this case matters a lot to me. But I think imagine how you feel when you have a bad sinus infection, a really bad one. Make it 5 times worse, and then tell somebody you're going to have to fight 25 minutes at pace and get punched in the face over and over again. Like, yeah, no, that doesn't make any sense. That's Of course you pull out of the fight.
Yeah, like I said, can't be upset about it. Main event. You sounded a little hoarse, Pat. Voice a little cracked. I imagine you were excited because you got to see this one live.
I got to see both Gaethje Johnson and Whittaker Romero live. I was there for both nights of fights.
Yeah,
my voice is dead.
How was it? How was the experience for the middleweight interim title fight?
It was good. The crowd was pretty hot too.
Yeah,
there were a lot of Australian fans there, a lot more than I expected, and they were into it. Mm-hmm. It was a good crowd. It was a pretty knowledgeable crowd. Like it was. In terms of live crowds that I've been there for, it gave the business to Blades Omielanchuk.
Yeah.
But whatever that fight looked like on TV, it was a billion times worse live.
Yeah, I could appreciate what I was seeing because I'm following these fighters, but it wasn't a fun fight.
It's a fight that you rewatch when you're doing a preview for a card, and you're like, "Oh, this was good for Blades. This taught him this, and this thing." You get to see him doing it on the fly. But if you're lit up and you're expecting some good ass fighting, especially right after Miller Pettis, which was really fucking fun. Mm-hmm. I mean, the come down is really hard. And then a good buddy of mine who was there with us for the fights described Blades Omielanchuk as the co-main event of a Bully Beatdown episode. And that was about right. But for Whittaker Romero, it was an educated crowd. Like that was a crowd that knew what it was watching. Yeah. I would say more so than you get in most Vegas crowds. And the highs were high.
Yeah, and I imagine like an educated crowd, like they kind of need to be a little educated to really appreciate that fight. Not to give some kind of elitist vibe, but it was very much a chess match. It was not constant action, but it was tense, and there were all these little adjustments being made, and it was fascinating. But you kind of have to, I think, like know the game to get into it. I can imagine somebody who doesn't know either of these fighters, who's never seen a fight before, watching it and not being thrilled. But for people who know the game, I mean, it was just utterly compelling.
I largely agree with that, with a couple of caveats. So I think that even if you're not a big time fan, it's easy to appreciate Yoel Romero's big flashy movements.
Yeah.
So it just looks like he's doing awesome things. So I think you don't have to be super into it to appreciate that. But I also think that slower paced fights with a hot crowd are easier to appreciate in person than they are on TV.
Sure.
Like because of the tension, like the live tension in the arena makes those fights much more interesting than they are if you're watching for the first time on TV or necessarily on the rewatch. Like I think this will still be a fun fight to rewatch, but it won't feel the way it did watching it there live with, a bunch of other screaming degenerates.
Yeah, the atmosphere, the uncertainty, even without me being in an arena watching it, it was a big part of how fascinating it was and how easy it was to get wrapped up in it. I will say, too, this is something I did want to talk about, and I think this might also have been, to counter my own point, I guess, an avenue for, like, casual or non-fans to get into the fight. It had a very clear narrative, I think. Like, I know... some people really hate Yoel Romero. Some people really like him, and I always enjoy his fights. I've been, somewhat ambivalent towards him. He's kind of an enigmatic sort of figure to me. But in this fight, like I think watching with the commentary, especially seeing how quickly Joe Rogan, who did a great job for this, picked up on the fact that something was wrong with the way Whittaker was moving, picked up quickly on the fact that he'd busted his knee. And then we were kind of following that story. It was so clear to me that Whittaker was the protagonist. And we had like a really compelling narrative going on here where we had this like big monstrous looking, I mean, Yoel Romero started the fight crawling on all fours like a damn monster. Like he was very intimidating and has this very strange sort of hypnotic, deadly, graceful way of moving. And so I think watching it was really easy to get wrapped up into the story of like Robert Whittaker is adjusting and he's persevering and he is sticking it out. And like you got to see him stuffing more takedowns. You got to see Romero slowing down. You got to see Whittaker picking up the pace and landing big shots. I just thought, like, from a story perspective, we'll talk about the technique more, but from a story perspective, it was really easy for me to get into it. And I just found myself, like, extremely happy when Robert Whittaker won. I realized after the fight that I almost unknowingly had been rooting for him since, like, the first minute had passed.
Yeah, I'm one of the world's biggest Yoel Romero marks, and I was still rooting for Whittaker.
Yeah, it was hard not to. It's something about it.
Point. Yeah, so Joe Rogan was on my flight on Sunday morning.
Oh,
like yeah, he was right up there in a wonderful first class seat. I was not in first class. I was in steerage. But
do they still call it steerage?
Rewatch, well, what?
Do they still call it steerage?
I don't think there's any steerage on Virgin America. It was actually a lovely experience.
Okay,
but. I thought on the rewatch, because obviously I didn't have commentary the first time I watched it, I thought he did a fantastic job. And I think generally speaking, he has done a really good job since they went to a 3-man booth. I think there's less pressure on him to carry the broadcast. And so that allows him to do what he does really well, which is craft narratives in fights.
Yeah.
When he gets the narrative wrong, it can be real wrong. But I think that more often than not, he does a good job of crafting a story and telling that story as the fight goes on. With Goldberg, he had to do too much of that. And when he had to be the one crafting the narrative every time, it didn't necessarily work well. But now he has 2 other people to bounce off of and 2 other people to work with.
He really was
to create better stories.
He really was the color man. Like he added the flavor and emotion and energy and narrative to the fight.
Precisely.
Like enhanced the experience of getting wrapped up in the fight. And I thought Stan and Rogan and Anik all together actually did a fantastic job. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to their commentary on some of the other fights, but obviously like Stan keeps getting better as a technical analyst and has been great since the beginning. And Rogan was in my favorite Rogan mood. I don't know if anyone else picks up on these things, but I've always assumed this is like fairly high Joe Rogan, where he'll be watching a fight and his voice is kind of softer than usual, and he'll just say things like, "Look at this," you know, like he gets really wrapped up and involved and fascinated. You can just tell he's really like fascinated and like all these equations are running in his head, trying to figure out what's happening. And I find it to be really endearing when he's just into it.
It is fashionable among a particular MMA set to bash Rogan, and I am not one of those people. Like this, I really genuinely think that if you appreciate him for what he does well, then he adds something fundamental to the product. Yeah. Right? Like he adds something fundamental to the fights. But let's get into the technique here.
Yes.
We've talked enough about story. We've talked enough about what this felt like. Let's talk about how it actually went down.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so fight starts off. Yoel Romero, I mean, got the first 2 rounds. I will say, more credit to Robert Whittaker. They were the closer rounds of the fight. It's not as if Yoel Romero had any really big moments like hurting Whittaker or slamming him really hard or anything like that, other than the fact that he hurt his knee in the first round. But I did think Romero showed a great deal of poise. I mean, I think he was surprised by Robert Whittaker's wrestling defense, as I think many people were. I mean, even me. I knew coming into this from the Jacare fight that Whittaker's a great scrambler and a great wrestler, but I think it really shocked Romero how well Whittaker was able to fight him off and get to the clinch and sort of stall him out. And I think Romero, it seemed to me like he really came into this fight banking on wearing Whittaker down and closing that stamina gap by holding him to the ground or against the fence and beating him up slowly. And it was really difficult for him to do that. I think Whittaker forced him to use a lot of energy getting him down and keeping him in place, so that by the time the 3rd round came around, like Whittaker had been adjusting all along and getting his reads, and Romero was just only getting slightly worse round by round.
So one of the really striking things about this fight to me is I think it's one where both guys fought it correctly. Sure. I think they both did the things that gave them the best shot at winning the fight.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I don't think Romero really planned to hold him down. I don't think he thought it was going to be easy to keep Whittaker on the ground. I think what surprised him was that he had so much trouble finding offense and transitions. Like I think he thought, oh, okay, I take him down. I hit those little trips. I off balance him. I'm going to find opportunities to land 2, 3, 4 shots in there. And because that's what he's had a lot of success doing in recent fights. And that's actually what one listener, I can't remember who it was, pointed this out in our discussion of this a couple of weeks ago, that we hadn't talked much about the wrestling. And that was because I really didn't think that Romero would be able to hold Whittaker down. What I think I missed beforehand and caught again when I went back to rewatch some film is how good Romero is at, okay, he takes you down. You're really shocked at like how powerfully you just hit the mat. Your instincts kick in and you try to scramble, and then Romero hits you with 2 or 3 good shots.
Yeah.
Like, so despite the fact that he is such a specialized wrestler, that's actually very 2017 metagamey of him to do that, because he's not trying to just grind you out on the mat. He's looking for opportunities to generate those kinds of big moments. And the stress of having to deal with those moments, I think, is what wears Romero's opponents down, rather than just the pure energy that they have to expend. It's, he gets me down, I've got to worry about him hitting me with just ridiculous shots 4 or 5 times as I get back up.
We felt the tension, as we've covered. We felt the tension in this fight. It's there in every Yoel Romero fight. There is just this buzzing energy, just knowing that he could do something terrible to you as his opponent at any moment. And I think that probably does have an effect. Like, he's kind of a pressure fighter without having to pressure people. He has an aura about him that I'm sure has an effect on most opponents. 2 things went wrong for him. Robert Whittaker, I just learned this, by the way. Robert Whittaker is the 2017 Australian National Wrestling Champion.
Is he really?
Yeah, he won. Like, I think he basically qualified for the Australian Olympic wrestling team in, like, May. He's been doing cross-training at competing as a wrestler. Yeah, I watched some footage of it.
How did nobody know this?
I know.
Like, how is this not an enormous narrative heading into this fight?
I know, and he's a savage wrestler. I've seen some of his takedowns. He's nasty. Like, you saw in this fight, he really did not have trouble. You could say, by some metrics, he out-wrestled Yoel Romero. He was the only one to get taken down, but if we're looking at who was able to make it their fight using their wrestling, it was Whittaker. Defending the takedowns, scrambling free. Even landing some nice shots in the clinch as the bout went on. Yeah, I just learned Whittaker is apparently like an actual decorated wrestler now and is still competing in wrestling to sharpen up his game, which is phenomenal. And it's clearly, he's reaping dividends from that. The other thing that went wrong is that, and I didn't realize that he had this skill to this extent before this fight, and now I have to appreciate it. I think Whittaker's a better improviser even than Yoel Romero. It's insane. We talked a lot. We gave Romero so much credit, and he deserves it, for his ability to pick up on an opening and capitalize and do things that aren't trained. I'm sure there's a lot of things that Romero does that aren't trained. There are things you might pick up on in sparring or through lots of experience in fights, but those little transitional moves, the sudden counters, the tricky chain wrestling, that's all stuff that you feel in the moment. It's kind of like funk striking, if you will. It's the striking version of funk wrestling. And Whittaker outdid him there. Like, Whittaker had a moment where Romero came in with a kick, and Whittaker checked and lunged forward with a jab as he was checking the kick with his lead leg. Like, it's not a move you train. Nobody trains to throw a stiff jab with one foot on the ground, but he did it, and it worked. Like, he hit Romero hard, he blocked the kick, and then continued advancing. Those kinds of things are really remarkable to me, and I think that the thing that really stands out, like, obviously Whittaker is fundamentally sound everywhere, but he's so creative. He doesn't fall into boxing patterns, and I don't know, like, his whole striking game is just... It's so difficult to get a read on what he's going to do. Meanwhile, he's getting perfect reads on what openings he has on his opponent. He
is an extraordinary striker.
Yeah.
Like, really, 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 really good. And I don't think that we have yet fully appreciated how good he is.
I mean, this is probably his best striking performance yet.
And it was so different than some of his others, too. That's one of the things, like, that really defines this generation's strikers, guys like Whittaker and Max Holloway, and I think Ioane Jędrzejczyk is playing a similar kind of game, where it's the adaptability. It's not just that they can do one thing and do it really well, it's that they have extremely good fundamentals, and that gives them a variety of flexible tactical and strategic approaches to winning a fight.
Right.
So if you can, like, because Whittaker can win fights kind of pressuring, like he was trying to do at the beginning of this fight before Romero cracked his knee and forced that adjustment. He forced him to make really extreme adjustments to what I imagine was probably his plan coming in. I think he thought he was going to get in Romero's face more than he did.
Sure.
And pressure him and force him to work. I think that was probably the plan. And when that didn't work, he was forced to play more of an explosive kind of stick and move game, draw out Romero, counter him, and find ways of winning a relatively slow-paced fight, the kind that we thought would actually probably favor Romero.
Sure, yeah. And then in rounds 4 and 5, he did manage to start getting Romero's back to the fence and keeping him on the end of his punches and picking his shots. He did end up pressuring a little more in the end of the fight, but it didn't come around immediately. And I agree. I think it looked like that's what he expected. And it, like, just the fact that he could adjust not just to how the fight's going differently, but to an injury that he knew he had sustained, and all of this was so remarkably impressive. You know what? John Danaher posted on Instagram after this fight. I thought he raised a really good point. We don't really talk much about Whittaker's team, but they did a really fantastic job cornering him. And I think they deserve praise because Danaher was saying that, you know, there's a very corporate approach to training MMA fighters these days, and most of the champions come from big camps like ATT, AKA, and Jackson's and TriStar, like these big teams that have a lot of contenders. And Whittaker doesn't. Like, there are no other UFC fighters that work with Whittaker's coaches. And he's...
If Whittaker, aside from one or possibly two camps where he went to TriStar, Whittaker has had the same coach since he was like 7 or 8 years old, I think.
Yeah, and criticizing it to me would be like criticizing the fact that Canelo Alvarez has had the same coach his whole career. People look at Canelo's coach and like, I don't know who this guy is. He should go to one of the celebrity trainers. That same environment exists in boxing. And I'm like, why? Like, he's got such a great game and he's getting better all the time. He clearly has a really good working relationship. This is clearly a very good trainer for him. And I got that feeling from this fight as well. Whittaker's team, they just handled everything so well in the corner. And even during the fight, like Whittaker was a little tense, I remember, in the third round coming forward. He steps in with a feint, and they had one of those big clashes. They had lots of just body collisions where Romero went for a flying knee, hit Whittaker in the chest. And his corner was instantly, it was like, keep your jab on him, feint. That's all he's looking for. He's looking for that big counter, keep your distance, and keep pot-shotting him. Like, they were seeing what Romero was doing. They're clearly a very insightful group of guys, and they carried themselves really well here.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a truly, like, an actually remarkable performance from both guys. Like,
yeah,
because Romero flashed tools that he has never shown before. Yeah. Like, I mentioned the last time that the last time we talked about this when we previewed the fight, the like stupid fast body shot and right hook counter that Romero landed on Weidman. His counter punching in this fight was ridiculous. He was absolutely on point with it. Like, he hit a few times on Whittaker a beautiful inside angle straight left that was as sharp as you will ever see. The timing on it was so good. And I think that's actually what we're going to see from Romero a little more moving forward, like as he squeezes a few more years out of his career, is just straight up counterpunching.
Which makes sense.
He was really good at it.
Yeah, tons of speed, great reactions, great eyes, and not superb stamina. So, like, ride out the fight, let the opponent come to you, pick your shots, and when you have crushing power, it's actually a pretty reasonable way to fight. I think, he even later in the fight, like, people were really shitting on Romero for this performance. Some people were like, oh, he gassed and whatever. I thought he had a really smart game plan. And when he knew he was losing, when he felt the momentum really slipping away, he was going for it in the 5th round. He put pressure on Whittaker. He was really trying to drop some bombs on him and putting combinations together. He wasn't just looking for one big knockout punch. He tried, man.
He won the first 2. More or less felt the momentum slip away in the 3rd, gave away the 4th, and came out like balls on fire in the 5th trying to win it. Yeah. And he was in good shape to win the fight until he slipped and couldn't get up. And like, that was the last thing. He was out of energy and he waited a split second too long and gave Whittaker the opportunity to get on top and establish top position. And like, but if he had immediately sprung back to his feet and managed to find one more really good burst of explosive offense, he might have won the fight. Yeah. Like, he was in position to win it with, what was that, like 1 minute and 20 seconds left, I think, somewhere in there?
I believe so.
Yeah, like, I don't get that criticism. I thought Romero lost the fight because of his limitations as a fighter. The inherent limitations. What makes him great is also the problem with his game.
Yeah, and because Whittaker so brilliantly exploited those limitations. Yeah, like, he lost to a really great fighter.
Yeah, I mean, Whittaker I think it speaks to how great Whittaker is that he couldn't push the pace he probably wanted to push. He did not. Whittaker, I don't think, got the fight that he wanted out of this.
Yeah.
He did his best to adjust to what he had to do, and he still won it. That speaks to me just how fucking incredible a talent Whittaker is. Like, I've talked a lot about Romero because I love Romero and he's one of my favorite guys to watch, but I genuinely think Whittaker is one of the best and most exciting talents in the UFC. And I've thought that for a long time. Like, he's just so meat and potatoes with the way that he approaches it. Like, it's not as easy to get super fired up about it. But in terms of pure talent, I think it's like him and Holloway are my two favorite young, like, at the very top of the game kind of fighters.
Yeah, it's really hard to disagree at this point as he now knocks off the two guys in a row that were considered to be the two the two coming champions, the two potential champions who were at the top of their games. And Whittaker beat them both in very convincing fashion. How about, before we wrap up, there's one tactic I want to talk about, because I know a lot of people were talking about it, and will probably be upset if we don't mention it. The front kicks from Whittaker, and the kicking game in general. I mean, we talked briefly, I think, when we previewed this fight about how sneaky Whittaker's kicking game could be. And it looked like he really fell back on some of his Taekwondo roots here. I think maybe because the pressure was off and he was at a longer distance, he started finding weapons that worked from that range. His right front kick / right teep is ridiculous. It's so fast and accurate and powerful. I mean, he caught Romero really uncleanly a few times. He caught him on the hip with the heel. He was going for the ball of the foot to the gut. And Romero was throwing a punch at the same time, throwing his weight forward, and it flung Romero off balance. And I think those kind of tactics really allowed Whittaker to slow Romero down even more while keeping that long distance that allowed him to sort of, wait till he could really neutralize the wrestling with his own wrestling.
Those, like, strategically speaking, those kicks are what allowed Whittaker to win a much slower paced contest than he probably planned on. Like, I really think that Whittaker went out there thinking that he was going to throw 15 strikes a minute and just kind of overwhelm Romero up to a certain point until either he drained his gas tank or Romero started giving him opportunities to counter, which eventually did happen. Mm-hmm. But I think that was probably something Whittaker was planning on doing anyway. But the aggregate effect of those is what allowed him to maintain his distance, to limit the opportunities that Romero had to really get one of his great explosions off. And to land the kind of cumulative damage that helped to take even more out of Romero's gas tank. That's really good. I have one more question for you, Connor. Who do you so I assume you think that either of these guys is going to be the favorite over Michael Bisping if they fight. Whittaker presumably is going to get that chance.
Yes.
Who do you think is actually the tougher matchup for Bisping?
I think it might be Whittaker.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the fact that Bisping is a high-volume, crafty striker, he's adaptable like Whittaker, obviously does not have Whittaker's chin, but he has a better chance, I think, of protecting it against someone like Romero, who's just picking off a big shot now and then, and who will slow down, which, Bisping's always has stamina as a weapon. I think Whittaker can probably match Bisping's stamina, pace, range, and hits harder and moves faster. So it's kind of just like while it might seem like a more competitive fight, maybe there's less of a chance of something really big happening that Bisping would have to survive. I get the sense that Whittaker is just kind of a better version of him. I think it would be like Jędrzejczyk Kowalkiewicz,
Yeah, I'm glad that you raised that, because I think the popular opinion is that, like, well, Romero, just because of the violence, is the massive favorite to finish Bisping, and he is. Like, I would pick Romero to end Bisping. But, like, Bisping has a path to victory in that fight. There is a clear game plan for him to follow that's going to maximize his chances of winning it. That path to victory is not there against Whittaker.
No. What's the path to victory? Just outstrike Robert Whittaker, right?
Yeah, if Bisping wants to have a quick-paced striking matchup, Whittaker can match or exceed that volume while doing more damage, being more sound in the pocket, setting a better distance, and having more tools if the fight needs to go there to hit a quick double, to grind it out in the clinch for a little while, which are not things that Bisping has ever been exceptionally comfortable doing.
Yeah, so, and also he is markedly better on defense. Yoel Romero had a very hard time hitting Whittaker cleanly as that fight went on. And the other thing, that left uppercut he landed in round 4 was one of the most sexual things I've ever seen. It was so beautiful. He threw away the right hand. He saw the opening for it several minutes before that, just missed and knew the punch was there. He faked the right hand, got Romero to extend a jab, and then uppercut with the left hand came up from underneath. It was just like, you don't see that in MMA. That was some high-level boxing shit. And it was
really good, man.
He's
sexy. Really good. He's so good.
Yeah,
like,
it was just a performance that makes you excited about seeing more Robert Whittaker. And it sucks that he's probably going to have to be out for a while with a knee injury. But like this performance, to me, gives him tons of momentum in my mind as just a character to keep following because it was so fascinating.
One more thing real quick.
Oh, yeah.
He is, whether he likes it or not, Bobby Knuckles.
Oh, yeah.
But if he doesn't like that, I have a slight modification.
Okay.
The Honorable Robert Knuckles.
The Honorable Robert Knuckles.
The Honorable Robert Knuckles. Honorable spelled the Australian way with a U.
Oh, okay. All right.
The Honorable Robert Knuckles. Robert R. Knuckles, if he wants to keep the Reaper in there.
I think the funny thing is that Bobby Knuckles is just clearly not hard enough, in his opinion. Like
yeah, that's so funny.
It sounds like silly to him, but Robert Whittaker is from like a country where good buddies call each other cunt as a term of endearment. So like it's just not hard enough. Bobby Knuckles sounds too cute, but it's got a charm to it. It's got a charm, Bobby. Come on, man.
I mean, I'm actually gonna text Anik and I'm gonna tell him like you should bounce this off him the next time you call one of his fights. If he doesn't like Bobby Knuckles, the Honorable Robert Knuckles. I feel like that's a nice middle ground because it sounds official and also kind of terrifying. So, I mean, I'm sticking with this. I think this has legs. Bobby Knuckles, I'm good with. I will continue to use it. I'll be very happy with it. But the Honorable Robert Knuckles, I submit this for your consideration.
It works for me.
Our fine listeners of Heavy Hands.
It's an acceptable permutation by my standards. All right, we'll wrap up this segment now. Whittaker Romero was honestly everything we hoped it could be and more. We said it was the fight between the two best middleweights in the world. I think it looked like a fight between the two best men in their division. And let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to get to, of course, the other big fight of the evening, one we've already mentioned, Justin Gaethje versus Michael Johnson in World Series of Fighting lightweight champion Justin Gaethje's promotional debut with the UFC, an absolute Donnybrook, a barn burner, a slobber knocker for the ages. We will break it down after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Gaethje Johnson, Pat, I think we're ready to roll. Let's talk about the fight. It was dynamite. It was... Hold on. You hear that? It's me opening a 2-liter. Forgot to do it before we started recording. Very professional. It was just everything. And most importantly, it was a very satisfying and, for me, relieving proof of my oft-uttered assertion that a brawler who's a really good brawler can compete with the best, can compete with the elite in his division. And I was worried. I think Michael Johnson, in a lot of ways, was one of the more dangerous matchups, if not the most dangerous matchup in like the top 5, top 10 lightweight area. The speed, the power, the boxing skill, distance management, and Justin Gaethje found a way to make it his fight. And some of that was through technical improvements, and some of it was through sheer grit and heart and determination. And it was just a new Justin Gaethje in some ways, and a fully perfect, classic Justin Gaethje performance, which to me was very... it was a big relief, because I was really worried that he would kind of burn out and would struggle with the athletic level of UFC talent. And I think now, like, there's a good case to be made that he might be in position for a title shot soon.
Yeah, so I think that a few things. Yes, I agree with all of that. I think you're absolutely on the right level with it. I think that because we're so used to seeing guys come from other organizations to the UFC and struggle athletically, we assume that would also be true for Gaethje. If you look back at the guys that Gaethje fought in World Series of Fighting, he fought really good athletes. He fought Luis Palomino, who for all of his many flaws as a fighter, is extraordinarily fast and powerful. He fought Luis Firmino, who was, honest to God, looked like he'd hit up every pharmacy from Mexico to Brazil before that fight. Like, that guy looked like he was, like he was just running on, some god-awful form of, like, hyper anabolic. I mean, that guy, he was really fast. Faster than he had any right to be.
But even
Melvin Villard is really fast.
Even so, it was, maybe even because of that reason, like the speed, but more than that, the boxing ability of Luis Firmino really gave Gaethje a lot of problems. I think there was good cause for concern that somebody like Michael Johnson, who was
huge cause for concern. Yeah. I don't dispute that. What I'm saying is I think that we overestimated because Gaethje was still faster than those guys.
Yeah, he was better prepared for it than we thought. Maybe we haven't given him enough credit for also being a really great athlete.
Because he moves. This is a trap we fall into. I'm going to be honest. There's a racial aspect to it. We fall into this trap with white fighters.
Sure.
Where this was also true of early career Chris Weidman, where he looked a little plodding, and then all of a sudden he was kind of on you.
Yeah.
Like that. He is like Gaethje, because he looks a little plodding, because his footwork looks a little heavy. It like tricks us into thinking he's actually slower than he is. Now Weidman, now that he's lost a step, he's like 32 or 33. I think he's 33. Weidman is actually not that fast anymore. Mm-hmm. But when he was 26 or 27, he was real quick.
Yeah.
Like Gaethje is really, really fast. And he kind of lulls you with that like plodding look. But even when he's plodding, he's not moving that slowly. He's really fast.
He is. We'll talk about this throughout the segment, I suspect. But Justin Gaethje, to me, he's obviously impressive on his own terms, but he is a testament to the talent of Trevor Whitman as a trainer. Because
absolutely,
it is as if Trevor Whitman had a conversation with Jack Blackburn. He was like, "How did you train Joe Louis and why?" And Jack told him, "Well, I found out he hit really fucking hard, and he could take a shot, and I built everything in his style around that." And yeah, Gaethje is not the same type of fighter as Joe Louis, nor, is he as good a boxer, obviously. But he has some of the same basic ingredients. And then he added to that the fact that he really is at his best in what looks like a 50-50 exchange. Because, Gaethje's so tough, he's accurate, he throws great combinations, better now than ever, and has massive power, and attacks every single target available to him. So what looks like a 50-50 exchange, if you're giving Justin Gaethje that kind of exchange, it's never really 50-50. It's like 70-30 in his favor.
They're 50-50 tactically.
Yes.
They're not 50-50 strategically.
Right.
And that's what makes Gaethje's game work, is if you think of him as just a dude who's going to knock your block off with a single shot, you've captured something about Gaethje's style, but you haven't actually understood it. Mm-hmm. What makes Gaethje dangerous is that he's going to keep coming after you. He's going to keep fighting the same fight but more dangerously as time goes on, and he's going to wear you down. So I thought Johnson actually had the right idea with trying to work Gaethje's body whenever he could. He's like, okay, I'm going to try to slow him down. I'm going to try to wear him down if at all possible. But it turned out that Gaethje's low kicks, his pressure, just the sheer physicality of his style, his willingness to get inside and lean on you with a collar tie, the willingness to fight in the pocket, to put mental pressure as well as physical pressure and accumulative damage on you, like that's just really, really hard to deal with.
Yeah, and of course his chin plays a factor, as does his mental durability, because even there are people. Some of the people Michael Johnson has knocked out or stunned, I'm sure have had chins comparable to Justin Gaethje's in terms of pure physical ability to withstand physical force. But most people will not be as out on their feet as Justin Gaethje was after both of the big shots that Johnson landed on him and managed to come back. Like he's
got a vintage Dan Henderson chin.
Yeah.
I think is maybe the best analog for Gaethje's
and the
chin.
heart, man. Like I did a piece that just came out. If you're listening to this, it came out on Monday, and I urge you to check it out. I called it "Sticking the Landing," Justin Gaethje and Rocky Marciano, and that's the guy that I think of when I watch Justin Gaethje. Is like there was a time you watch Rocky Marciano and you're like, this guy's crude. He's not that skilled or slick, and like he's supposed to beat guys like Archie Moore, Ezzard Charles, Jersey Joe Walcott, like all-time greats and legends of boxing. And he did it because, like he just, the first fight he had with Jersey Joe Walcott, he got knocked down for the first time in his career. It was his first really big test with the champion of the world. first knockdown, and then he goes into the fight. Walcott stays ahead of him. He's outsmarting him. He's ahead on all the scorecards. And Marciano is just so determined, he finds a way to land that one big shot in round 13. And Gaethje has the same kind of feel. He maybe doesn't have the legendary conditioning of a Marciano, but he also does not suffer from the effects of exhaustion the way his opponents do. Like, he was as tired as Michael Johnson at the end of this fight. But
this is something we've talked about before and we'll continue to talk about again moving forward. Stop paying attention to how somebody looks. Look at what they do.
Yeah.
If Gaethje may be tired, but he keeps throwing, and what he throws is every bit as hard as what he was throwing in the first round.
And a big difference in this matchup was that both guys slowed down, but I think slowing down will always hurt somebody like Michael Johnson a lot more than it will someone like Gaethje. Because
absolutely.
Johnson's big edge was his speed, and it was clear that once he was exhausted, he was really gassed, his hand speed, his foot speed was gone. So he couldn't counter as well, he couldn't get out of the way. Gaethje, meanwhile, he just has heavy hands. Whether the punches are coming slower or they're not set up as well, they hit just as hard whether he's dead tired or completely fresh. Yeah. So
you're right, because there are multiple kinds of power, right? Yeah. There are different ways of generating knockout force with a blow. And Johnson has a combination of athletic power and snappy power.
Yeah.
Like, where snappy power meaning the ability to find the right spot in the arc of a punch that generates maximum force, athletic power being the sheer physical gifts to drive off and really get force behind a blow. Gaethje has athletic power, but he also just has the I have concrete blocks in my fists.
Yeah, it just looks like his hands weigh 1,000 pounds apiece. Like,
yeah,
he has like Rocky Marciano, who could land just an ugly ass clubbing overhand on someone's neck and it would bowl them off their feet. That's Gaethje.
See, and that's what makes Golovkin such a power puncher, is he has all of those. He has the athletic power, he has the snappy power, and he has the concrete block power.
And Joe Louis was that way as well, I would say.
Yeah, and so even if Gaethje gets tired and he loses a little bit of the athletic power, his shots still move you.
Oh yeah.
And also because the way that he wears you down with attrition, it limits your ability to continue taking those shots. You can't brace yourself the way that you could early in the fight when your leg's been kicked out from under you. Mm-hmm. You can't flex your torso or your obliques the same way if he's been pummeling you to the torso. Like, it makes it harder to do all the things that allow you to absorb the force of a blow as the fight goes on when he has destroyed your base.
Yeah.
That's something I hadn't actually thought about. I wonder if there's a corollary there that, like, it becomes easier to knock somebody out to the head later on if you've beat up the things that allow them to absorb a shot.
Maybe. Yeah, that would make sense to me. I mean, someone is easier to hurt when they're off balance. When they're not stable. I can imagine that. I mean, it just gives you the option of taking the sting out of their shots and slowing them down, making them worry about other targets. That opens up the head, even if it doesn't make it necessarily more vulnerable. And, just also the fact that you're just attacking whatever is given to you. Like, that's probably one of Gaethje's greatest strengths, is that he is not picky at all about what targets he chooses to attack.
It's going to be interesting to see how he evolves in his career, because I can see a path where he brawls less and just becomes a pressure fighter and is really good at it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about some of the improvements we saw in this fight. I don't know if anything stood out to you, but I thought I saw pretty clearly that he was making some nice adjustments, and in the way that we have always said should be made. Again, a testament to Trevor Whitman's skill and intelligence as a trainer, that Gaethje is still fighting a Gaethje fight. But he is developing and refining the tools necessary to make that an easier and easier type of Gaethje fight.
So I thought he did a much better job of cutting off the cage and cutting it off both with footwork and with his looping strikes, especially his low kicks. I thought he did a better job of kicking when Johnson planted to pivot out. Mm-hmm. And so that limited Johnson's ability to continue moving. It stopped that movement in its tracks and gave Gaethje the opportunity to force him back again. And it did more damage. Like, it hurts way more to get kicked in the leg, and it does way more damage to the muscle and the tendons and everything there if you're planted hard on it when it lands. Mm-hmm. And when somebody steps out to pivot to create that space is the perfect opportunity to do it. Gaethje hit him with like 3 or 4 shots exactly like that.
Yeah.
And shouts to former Sherdog rider Tomas Rios who I was at the fights with, because he picked out that dynamic exactly beforehand. He's like, I'm betting big on Gaethje because I think every time Johnson tries to plant to pivot out, Gaethje is going to kick his leg out from under him. That he's really vulnerable to that. So shout out to a fun guy to watch fights with.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a sharp observation, and it turned out to be exactly correct. So I thought that was one. I thought Gaethje's raw footwork was better.
Yeah, that one really stood out to me. The fact that he was, I mean, Johnson is not like doesn't have the most technical footwork, but somebody's just plodding after him and following him around, he can outmaneuver him and run him into shit all day.
The Joe Lozon fight,
yeah, or the T-Bow fight, I mean, like he can run people into shots by playing Matador. He's very good at it, and he didn't really get the chance. I think both of us expected that if Gaethje was going to win this fight, he was still going to badly lose the first round. And that kind of ended up happening. He was kind of out on his feet or really badly hurt at the end of the first round. But he won the first few minutes. He was in control from the get-go because he was pressuring and keeping Johnson against the cage and really maintaining his distance. I think he was making Johnson quite uncomfortable. And I didn't expect him to do that. I did not expect him to be able to corner Michael Johnson repeatedly as consistently as he did.
I think part of that was Johnson didn't hit him with as many dumb shots as Gaethje usually takes. That's like the other, I think, major improvement is Gaethje obviously still got hit. He got hit a lot. He got hit, but he got hit with the shots that he needed to get hit with and not ones that he didn't. Like this is, and maybe I'm forgetting a few because I was watching from the stands. I've only rewatched highlights. I haven't gotten a chance to rewatch the whole fight since then. But it seemed to me like Gaethje was doing a pretty good job of picking shots off as they came in, of taking glancing blows instead of flush blows. And when he got hit, it was with shots that Johnson had to work to land clean. Like Johnson's knockdown shot was a clever ass combination. That was a clever way of drawing Gaethje onto that shot. It wasn't a dumb one. It wasn't some of the shots that Gaethje got hit with against Firmino or Palomino or those guys.
And it was exactly the kind of shot that Michael Johnson should be landing on Justin Gaethje. Like it was fast. It was from a weird angle. Gaethje never saw it coming. And I don't fault him for not seeing it coming. It was a very tricky right uppercut, which the right hook and right uppercut, I've been saying for a while, that's Johnson's killer punch. That's his knockout blow. And it's super sneaky. I mean, we basically saw him level Dustin Poirier with the same exact punch. So, again, credit to Gaethje's heart and chin for his ability to withstand that. I thought Johnson approached this fight very well. I don't think he comes out of this looking bad at all. He also got to show off his chin, by the way, which is about as amazing as Gaethje's. It's pretty ridiculous, the kind of punishment Michael Johnson can absorb and keep fighting.
Yeah, that was something we talked about beforehand that I don't think got enough credit in the lead up to this fight. Is Johnson is rawhide tough and always has been. Has always been a really tough.
Yeah, he'll make mistakes mentally, but I mean it is very, very difficult to put that man away. And the other thing, so I thought that Gaethje's defense actually looked better. Picking off shots, I thought it was interesting. I'm not sure if he will have the same success with this against other people if he doesn't continue to evolve. Because I picked up on something watching this fight. Gaethje kept a really fairly close distance, mid-range or closer, as often as he could. And he did a nice job. He slipped and rolled under some shots. And he came in and tried to kind of smother, like Nate Diaz often does with people. He'd keep a tight, high guard, and he would kind of lean in and bend his knees and get in close. So it's difficult to hit him with any long-range punches. And it blocked the hooks, which I thought was really useful. Johnson's got great hooks. And he had a hard time of finding Gaethje when he was inside with those hooks. The only time he caught him with that uppercut and with a hook later, I think, was when Gaethje was kind of pulling away from the pocket. And I thought that it was interesting that Michael Johnson, Jordan Breen pointed this out on the Sherdog Roundtable, and I thought it was a good point. He's not a very good straight puncher. He kind of struggles to throw him. And my theory for that is that Michael Johnson, his hips are very externally rotated. I don't know if you've ever noticed it watching it, but he's extremely duck-footed. And because his toes point away from each other more than they should. And generally, when you're talking about generating power for punches, people with that stance, like I stand a little bit that way, and I have a very good left hook. That's my most comfortable, most powerful punch. And the right is a lot harder for me to throw, the right straight. And for a southpaw like Johnson, I think it's the same thing. The hips expanding outward, opening away from each other, that gives you rotational torque, basically, for hooks. But the hips pointing in towards each other a little bit, that gives you drive for straight punches. And when you're not able to turn that back foot in and close your hips together, you tend to like lean and fall in a lot. which means it's very difficult to get the right range for a straight punch if somebody's coming in low and getting close. And it wasn't until Johnson found that uppercut that he was really landing that many clean punches on Gaethje. I think that had a lot to do with it, that Johnson's just not a particularly straight puncher and struggles to do it well, and Gaethje just smothered his hooks, so it was really difficult for Johnson to get his game going until he managed to land a really big shot.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, I think Johnson we've now seen enough, I think, to know where Johnson kind of fits in the division, and I look forward to seeing him get the chance to feast on some fringe top 15 guys for a while and get his rep back, because he's now down to 9-8 in the UFC. But look at the guys that he's lost to.
He's a guy that I think deserves. People are like, why was he number 5? He's like 3-1 in his last 4. I'm like to really good guys, and he also just knocked the shit out of Dustin Poirier. He beat Edson Barboza before that. Like I think he deserves a high ranking, and I hope he can continue to do well in the division because he's a really fun fighter.
Yeah, I mean, I think he eats alive guys like Stevie Ray. You know,
oh yeah,
like kind of fringe top 15 strikers. If you put Johnson in there with them, he is going to murder those dudes.
Yeah,
because I think shot for shot, especially in the first round, I think he's actually a harder puncher than Gaethje is. Like the fact that Gaethje was able to take and survive some of the shots from Johnson that he did is unbelievably impressive. Outside of McGregor, I don't think there is a shot for shot harder puncher in the division than Johnson.
Yeah,
like that dude is a brutal puncher. And the fact that Gaethje was able to take his shots, nobody else is going to challenge his chin like that.
I think, like McGregor, it has a lot to do with the hand speed and the timing and precision of Johnson. But
he's got snappy power and he's got athletic power.
You do not see his shots coming, and they have some heat on him. But good signs from Gaethje, man. Like a guy who, again, nobody thought Rocky Marciano was going to make it that far. Nobody thought he could have a crude style, as they used to call it, and compete with such classy operators. And he did. And he's, one of the greatest of all time in the sport of boxing. Who knows, man, if Gaethje could go that far. But it's not impossible. Like, seeing what he did here against Michael Johnson, it seemed like a really dangerous fight. And it looked like a dangerous fight, but not particularly more so than some of the other ones Gaethje has had. It was a Gaethje fight. And anybody who consents to that kind of battle is in for a rough time. I made this the central metaphor of that piece that I wrote, but I'll just use it here. I think nothing encapsulates Gaethje as a person, as a fighter, better than his post-fight celebration.
Oh, because especially this one, trying and failing twice to get up on the posts and falling off once, falling off a second time, then getting up there, doing it a third time, and sticking the landing.
He clocked his fucking chin when he fell off the first time. He went up, he was sweaty and tired, and fell and hit his face on the top of the fence. Then he tried again and couldn't even get up the chain link. And then he did it again. And I was watching through slitted fingers. I was like, this man is going to die. He's going to kill himself by trying to do an aerial backflip while thoroughly exhausted, and just going to completely spoil the most impressive win of his career. He stuck the damn landing.
You're right. That really is a perfect metaphor for Gaethje.
That's Justin Gaethje, man. It doesn't matter. When he's going to keep trying. Sometimes he's going to fail, but eventually he seems to succeed, and it's usually pretty goddamn spectacular when he does.
Yeah. One more quick question for you on this front.
Oh, sure.
Who do you want to see him fight next? What's the right matchup?
His first choice for his UFC debut was Edson Barboza, which I think would be bananas. Similar challenge to Michael Johnson with a few different wrinkles, and possibly more forgiving for Gaethje if he can find Edson's chin, because Edson is not as durable as Michael Johnson. Somebody asked me on Reddit what I thought the toughest fight for him was among the other top 5 guys. I think it might be Tony Ferguson. That would be a fight that I would love to see. I think Gaethje might be one of the few guys with a really good shot of beating Khabib.
Yeah, that seems to be the emerging consensus, and I'm with that. Like, Khabib really relies on being able to drag you into that you're more tired than me kind of fight, despite being tired himself. And I'm not sure you can do that with Gaethje.
Yeah, I'm
not sure Gaethje's going to tire that way.
That's where he lives, That's where he lives, is like, oh, the other guy's a little more tired than me. Or like we said, everything that makes him dangerous is really still there, and he's still got a great chin when he's exhausted. And
he's also not breakable. Like,
yeah,
you can't. I don't think that Gaethje, frankly, is thinking in a fight on a level where he can be broken.
No, he is just a machine.
Yeah, he's not there in that same way, which is that's not an insult to Gaethje. That's just like that's not the level on which he fights. Like you don't see there is no process of wheels turning in Gaethje's head. There's read and reaction. That's the way he wants it. That's the way he's trained, and he's open about that. He says that. He said that to you, didn't he?
Pretty much, yeah. He was like, yeah, this is how, he embraces that brawler style. He's also got, like, the warrior zen, where he's just, like, made peace with his own death. Like, he's just a scary dude. I don't think he is really consciously present in the same way a lot of other fighters are, which I think means you, in a fight, which I think, like, you can't scare him. He's not like... Well,
he's present without consciousness. Like
it seems that way. Like, yeah, it seems like he's not processing. Other fighters get worried, you know. They're not scaredy cats, but like they have to be cautious of things. And it doesn't seem like Gaethje feels that way. He's still able to pick shots and create openings, but it's like everything is just geared towards what's the next way I can smash you with my right hand or with my leg or with a knee. Everything is just like making his fight happen, and that makes him scary. And he's also a phenomenal wrestler, and I think pretty obviously freakishly strong. He managed to hold Michael Johnson after the second punch that staggered him. He managed to hold Michael Johnson in the clinch with his own back against the fence with one collar tie. I mean, Johnson was tired too, but I think that says something about the power of Justin Gaethje. He's got some of what Johnny Hendricks showed in the GSP fight, like a really surprising force inside. So
yeah, but without having to cut like 35 pounds to do it the way that Hendricks did.
Yeah.
Gaethje barely cuts weight.
That is phenomenal. Like, that is astounding.
He's just that dude. He wrestled at 157 in college and didn't cut weight to do that, apparently. Wow. And now he fights at 155 and barely cuts weight. Like,
can you imagine Gaethje at featherweight?
I kind of wonder whether he would gain anything from that.
Maybe he might lose power. Maybe he's the kind of guy who just needs to be fresh and... You never know.
I think he is. I think it's just a presence thing. Like
I support any fighter who fights at their weight. I think Chad Lepre said the same thing when he beat Brian Camozzi. Like fighters... Oh, Anthony Pettis said it after Jim Miller. Fighters fight at your weight. And I think 155, even if for somebody else Gaethje's size might not really be his ideal weight, it seems to work really well for him.
Yeah, I'm with that. Well, God, what a fun fight. What a fun fighter.
Fucking bananas, man. And like every single person who saw that has got to be a massive fan and eagerly awaiting Justin Gaethje's next fight. And that's what you want, man. He's the king of violence, and he brings it every single time. Let's wrap up this segment. When we come back, we will quickly try to rattle through some other fights that caught our eye. We wanted to talk about Anthony Pettis versus Jim Miller. We wanted to talk about Overeem versus Verdum 3. And then we're going to give a little bit of a cursory look at next week's card. We're mostly focusing on recaps today. I'm sure there will be some good stuff happening on Nelson versus Ponzinibbio, a.k.a. UFC Glasgow. But I want to talk more about what happened last weekend because it was really satisfying to me. So after this, Pettis Miller, Overeem Verdum 3, and then on to UFC Glasgow. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. Now, Pat, I really wish I could gloat about Overeem Verdum. Like, I really wish I could come in here after our somewhat heated discussion last week. Not as much as the Nunes Shevchenko. That one was fun. It was almost the fight I thought Overeem would give Verdum. You know what I mean? Like, you felt it slipping away from Verdum in that second round. And then Overeem got Overeemed. He got nailed on the chin and lost the third round and probably didn't do enough to take the first. So...
You remember when we had that extended argument about Elias Theodorou versus Cesar Ferreira?
I have not
kept
succeeded.
Screaming 11 strikes.
I have not yet managed to repress that terrible memory. So yes, I do recall it.
Alistair Overeem, in the first round of a fight that all three judges somehow gave him, landed 5 strikes. He threw 10 strikes. Yeah. He threw 10 strikes in 5 minutes of fighting. That is, and you had better take somebody's head clean fucking off in order to win a round where you throw 10 strikes. Like, that's, I understand that like Verdum landed 12 shots. 9 of them were low kicks. Those still count. Like, it's not like the 5 shots that Overeem landed in that round, like, were only like 3 of them were head strikes. It's not like the one additional head strike that Overeem landed versus the ones that Verdum landed was so much better that won him the round. Like, that's just bullshit scoring.
No, I would say Verdum probably landed the more telling head strikes. He had 2 really crisp jabs in that round, if I recall, that snapped Overeem's head back.
Jesus fucking Christ, man. Like, that is
not great.
Bad judging, like, but you're right as far as the second round. I totally understand what you were getting at. And then in the third round, Overeemed. Yeah. And Verdum still couldn't do anything with it.
It was, I mean, I thought I was watching that first round and I said, like, talking to my girlfriend while it was going on, I was like, okay, Overeem's losing this round, but I think he's fighting a smart fight. I think it makes a lot of sense to be super patient, stand in front of Verdum, make fun of him a little bit, make him come at you. It was very clear that Overeem was looking for the counter and wanted to force a fight in which Verdum would give it to him. And it worked really well in round 2. He had some great success, showed that I think there is a technical gap, particularly in the realm of defense and timing on Overeem's side, but he got Overeemed. Like, you just can't trust the man, even when it's so tricky picking his fights, because he really does do some brilliant things from time to time, and has some brilliant performances, and you can never trust him. He's just, at some point, he'll probably get tagged on the chin and look really silly flying around trying to save his life. So that happened. Weird decision. Do you have any criticisms of Verdum's performance? I heard some people saying they didn't really feel like he brought it as well as he could have. I mean, I was personally disappointed to see that he did flop once again in this fight. He pulled guard, which I'm like, that's never going to work against Overeem. Never again.
My uncharitable read of this fight is that both guys are shot. Finally.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing for Overeem to play like a smart counterpunching game, right? Like, I get that. It's another to throw 10 strikes in 5 minutes. That to me says you're not pulling the trigger. You're so dedicated to looking for the one shot that you're willing to more or less give away the round. Like, Overeem cannot have gone back to his corner thinking, got that one in the bag. Got it. Perfect. Yeah. We're well on our way to winning a decision here.
But I think, I don't think that probably matters that much for Overeem at this point in his career. He's had plenty of wins and losses. I mean, he's basically in an Anderson Silva state. He says he does it because he enjoys it, and he'll stop fighting when he stops enjoying it.
Well, no, but what I mean is, like, I think it's one thing to play that kind of game, and I get it, but if that's the way that you have to play that game, then I think you're way, way past it. Like, because by contrast, the Miocic fight and the Hunt fight, I thought this is still late evolution Alistair Overeem. This is still that guy, right? Like, he's not quite as fast, he's not throwing quite as much, but this is still identifiably the same fighter. In this fight, I thought this is not the same guy. Like, just the way that he looked, what he was doing, he looked way more trigger shy. He really did not want to throw very much at all. Like, at least in those fights, he was still giving himself chances of winning rounds, even as he was playing this slower paced game.
Sure. Yeah.
I thought that the underlying process was not nearly as sound. And, like, if he had missed one more shot, this would have been a 29-27 decision loss, So yeah, it's because it's one thing to do that. It's another to just not even put yourself in position to win the kind of slower paced fight that you have to fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's maybe in a position now where he's gonna be a guy that has to knock you out to beat you most times. But like, that's an adaptation. That's like, I can't take the shots. I'm slowing down. I can't put out as much volume. I'll just be a counterpuncher and just be super patient. Basically, do what Dan Henderson did for the last few years of his career. And you could call Dan Henderson shot at that point, but he still had some really big moments in him. I think Overeem's probably in that position. Verdum also, I agree with you, didn't look great to me. And I think, to me, it actually didn't feel surprising, seeing how sort of sluggish. And I don't know, he didn't really seem to have a lot of fire like he has had in some fights. The killer instinct doesn't seem to be there. And that seemed
That was the really worrisome thing.
Yeah, and that seemed in line with what I saw in the rematch with Travis Brown. I think that's what I was trying to say last week, is something in that fight seemed really off, and maybe that was it. Like, there was still the crazy playfulness. He did the flying sidekick. He tried it at the start of literally every single round in this fight. He tried that fucking flying sidekick. But aside from those big moments in the first round in the fight with Travis Brown, he was just kind of like weirdly complacent and unfocused. And I saw more of that in this fight. And that kind of worries me, because that's not what I'm used to seeing from Verdum.
Well, I think if you take away the crazy willingness to engage, then Verdum is just not an elite heavyweight.
Yeah.
That adaptation, the willingness to just go out there and fucking do it, is what moved Verdum into position to be winning titles and fighting for titles and competing with the very best in the world. Like, it's a confidence thing. And yeah. I don't think Verdum is not equipped to adjust to a late career thing the way that Overeem was, because he's not a big puncher, because he relies on cardio and durability and the willingness to mix it up and to force you into kind of crazy firefights. Like, not as a brawler, but just knowing that like a quick paced fight is one in which he's more likely to be landing more and better shots. Mm-hmm. And if he can't do that anymore, then he's not going to be able to compete at the top the same way. Also, his takedown attempts did not look good in this fight. He looked like he'd regressed as a wrestler. He looked like maybe he had a back injury. Like,
yeah,
it was hard for him to bend and drive.
Yeah, and I wondered if something was going on in his fight with Stipe, too. I remember there was some talk about a knee injury or a back injury then as well. And I don't know. Yeah, something's off with Verdum these days. Something
well, he's almost 40. He'll be 40 in a couple of weeks.
Nothing wrong with it. And he's had a crazy career. And I was wrong. Like, his chin isn't shot. He still took some hellacious shots from Overeem very successfully in that second round. He got hurt by him a couple times, but he didn't get blown out of the water every time somebody touched his chin. His chin is still more or less there. So, but it kind of, I agree with you. It kind of feels like both guys are maybe done as being at the very elite level. They've been hanging on through like ingenuity and late career adjustments for a few years now, but both guys probably still have something to show. And I don't really have any interest in seeing them ever fight each other again. Like, every single fight has been weird in some way, and unfortunately this was weird in the worst way, which is judging weirdness, the least satisfying kind of oddity. How about Miller Pettis, though?
Thought Pettis looked real good. Mm-hmm. That's a fight that he easily could have found a way to lose. And Miller came out fighting him exactly the way that he should have fought him. Like, Miller was doing exactly what he was supposed to do there. And I thought Pettis looked better. I thought his footwork especially looked better. When Miller tried to put the pressure on, he didn't have nearly as easy a time backing Pettis up. Miller could have done a little more with the low kicks. I think if he'd stuck with those, he could have put himself in a little better position later on. Mm-hmm. But by and large, he did what he was supposed to do. He fought the fight that he was supposed to fight. And Pettis didn't just out-athlete him. Like, Pettis had made some adjustments that I think gave him more opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think the athleticism was like the speed, the power. Those were obviously big advantages for Pettis. But he had a fight in which the technical deficiencies were not a huge problem, in which it seemed like he may have worked on them a little bit. I'm not 100% sold on it. Not quite as enthusiastic. I mean, I thought Jim Miller was going to pressure a lot more. I think it probably would have given him a better shot of winning to keep Pettis against the fence and try to throw some combinations, like get in close and take advantage of the fact that Pettis is just not a very good defensive fighter in the pocket, not a very clean combination puncher. I thought we would at least see some bursts of like steady pressure, like 30 seconds of constant pressure from Jim Miller. He spent a lot of time backing up, but seeing Anthony Pettis pressuring someone is kind of nice. He's had to resort to it in a few of his recent fights, with not unsuccessfully, but his pressure looked really effective in this fight. I couldn't quite tell if it was because he'd improved his footwork or something, but or if it was just that there was, Miller wasn't fighting a perfect fight, or there was an athletic disparity, but he was picking off shots and maintaining his distance while Miller was backed into the fence really well.
That pressuring Pettis is low-key always the best Pettis.
Yeah,
like, that was when he had the most success in his first fight with Benson Henderson. That was when he did all that crazy shit to Donald Cerrone, was when he backed Cerrone up to the fence. Mm-hmm. Like,
the second fight with Ben Henderson, the salvo of kicks and right hands, like forcing people backwards, making them guess, keeping the initiative. But I think that plays into what we've said about Pettis, is that he really is like he's a guy whose style is built around his opponents fearing or respecting him. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard for me to know if he pressured Jim Miller. I don't recall exactly. I mean, I'll have to rewatch it.
He did a little methodical pressuring.
Yeah.
And this was something he always used to do back in the day. He used front kicks to push Miller back.
Yeah. But how much of it was Miller consenting to being pressured? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Some part of it. So
true.
I have to wonder if somebody else comes out, if you were to fight Edson Barboza again, would it look the same as the first fight, or would he be able to improve on that performance? It's hard to say for me. But it was at least good to see him win. He looked nice, and I thought Jim Miller made a very credible effort. I don't think he loses any stock in that kind of fight. I actually gave him the third round. I know a lot of people had questions with that, but he beat the shit out of Pettis' legs in that third round, and comported himself well in a tough matchup.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. So moving on, we have a fun fight night card this weekend. We're not going to do a lot of in-depth analysis, but we're going to say a few words about the main event and then pick out a couple of other fights that were worth watching. So Gunnar Nelson, Santiago Ponzinibbio. What do you think, Connor?
I really like this fight. I think it's really compelling. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. I think I'm pretty bad at analyzing Gunnar Nelson fights. I think he's kind of like a Yoel Romero in some ways to me. I just find it really hard to get a read on him because, I know, like Romero, he tends to slow down as fights go on. So a long bout it rarely suits him. He's also extremely dangerous in explosive bursts. Big shots from long range, tricky punches, big takedowns. He's very physically strong, more so than you'd think for a guy who doesn't really cut weight, and I think he's improved that. I think since the Tumenov fight, we have seen him putting on a little more muscle. And other than that, we've covered this pretty well, there's a lot of weird gaps in the game of Gunnar Nelson. There's a lot of areas of certain phases in which he can't compete. I mean, the ground game is pretty damn complete, but the striking in particular, especially the boxing, there are a lot of holes, and that is absolutely something which someone like Santiago Ponzinibbio could exploit.
Well, he's not an awesome strategist. If you give Gunnar Nelson more or less the fight that he wants, he is going to find ways to make you pay for that. So he's not I think he does his best work when he can back you up toward the fence, because that's where his wrestling game plays best. He has a pretty decent explosive shot in open space, but I think he really does best with that when you're just close enough that you have to really worry about a right hand, but then he can freeze you, duck under, and one quick move. Not an extended kind of thing, but he backs your hips up to the fence, one quick move sucks you off the cage and gets you down.
And it's often it's a one quick compound move, which is he does very tricky shots where he'll move in and you think it's a punch coming and he's changing levels at the same time and hitting you with a shot that is a double leg, blast double, and also a trip. And there's a lot of different things going on that he can do very quickly, very explosively.
Exactly. And I think that actually plays a little better against the fence than it does in open space where his opponents have room to get their hips back. So it's not so much that he needs to be a pressure fighter as just the fence is really helpful for the thing that he does best that gets him to the place he wants to be, which is top position. So, but he doesn't pressure. He's not a pressure fighter, you know?
He doesn't have the volume for it or the footwork.
Yeah, like Alan Jouban, not normally a stick and move guy, just kind of consented to fight off his back foot there.
Yeah.
In that fight. He didn't really make a lot of efforts to stand his ground in open space. Maybe because he was afraid of Nelson just ducking under and taking him down, and he thought, well, okay, I'll commit to sticking and moving and just make that the thing that I do and kind of minimize the chance from the get-go. I get it, but I think that was a smart tactical decision and kind of a lacking strategic one in that I think you want to fight Gunnar Nelson in open space or with Gunnar Nelson's back to the fence.
Yeah, you want to make him react and you want to make him work. Both of those things. You can wear on the stamina, you can wear on him mentally. Like we saw in the Rick Story fight, the more exchanges there were, the more punches were thrown per exchange, the longer each sequence was, the worse Gunnar Nelson did. He doesn't have those layers of defense or those layers of counterpunching. He kind of freezes and stands up tall and leans away if you can put pressure on him. So, but do you think Ponzinibbio will be able to do that?
Before his last fight with Taleb, I would have said that Ponzinibbio has a good chance of making this an open space / him pressuring fight. But in the first round of that Taleb fight, he was real content to let Taleb kind of pressure him and dictate the distance and the pace.
It worries me as well.
Yeah, but by the second round, Ponzinibbio got after it. And by the third round, he was fully getting after it. So
Is it really a question of like, does Gunnar Nelson finish him in the first 2, maybe 3, or does Ponzinibbio win late? I mean, that's kind of how it feels to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he needs to attack with volume. He needs to attack Nelson's legs and body, and he needs to stay off the fence. So can he do that? I think so, but I think I'm kind of done betting against Nelson in that regard. Like, I think he finds a way to get it done here.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like I want to give respect to the crazy wrestling and grappling of Gunnar Nelson, especially the submission grappling. I mean, Ponzinibbio, I don't think he's ever been submitted. He's been knocked out, and Nelson certainly could nail him with a really hard shot. Like, he's very explosive and surprising. But Ponzinibbio's not bad on the ground. His takedown defense is not perfect, but I remember him scrambling pretty well with Ryan LaFleur in their fight. So I don't know. Like, if Nelson can't submit Ponzinibbio, then he really has to knock him out to beat him. Because I don't see him winning a 5-round decision over Ponzinibbio. Ponzinibbio throws a lot more. He's better defensively. He's just a better process-driven fighter. So, but Gunnar Nelson's more dangerous and in some weird ways more consistent. Like, Ponzinibbio's had weird moments where he's not been super focused, or he's, like consenting to the other person's fight or whatever. And Gunnar Nelson usually starts every fight the same way and tries the same things, and it's just as surprising every time because he's so fast and he has a few nice tricks up his sleeve for those quick karate-style entries. So it's a hard fight for me to call. I think I might go with Ponzinibbio, and I know people will groan because I'm just the guy who never picked Gunnar Nelson, so fully expect Gunnar Nelson to win. But I think if Ponzinibbio cannot get knocked out early, and doesn't get submitted, like if he can scramble his way free or at least survive, I think Nelson's going to start to slow down over the course of the fight. And Ponzinibbio may too, but he was still fighting his ass off in the 3rd round of that Taleb fight, and that was very quick-paced.
Yeah, I don't think Ponzinibbio picks up momentum as the fight goes on. He gets better as you get into the 2nd round. Like, that was the problem with the Larkin fight. Like, I think if he had survived the 1st round and gotten into the 2nd and 3rd rounds of that fight, I think he would have had a really good chance at winning it.
Yeah.
But I don't trust the stick and move Ponzinibbio to win this fight. I trust the pressuring Ponzinibbio to win this fight, and I'm not sure if he'll be able to get into that mode early enough against Nelson to really make it work.
The question is, can stick and move Ponzinibbio survive long enough for pressure Ponzinibbio to arrive?
Yeah, that's actually it. That's exactly the dynamic, I think, of this fight. And I don't think he will. I think he will make a mistake, let Nelson back him up. Nelson takes him down, and I do think Nelson can submit him. I'm
sure he can, yeah. I mean, I was just trying to remember how much I'd seen of Ponzinibbio's grappling.
He's really smooth. He's really technically sound. He spent a long time training with the Nogueira brothers. Like, he's a really good grappler.
Yeah.
I just think it's one of those levels things. Like, if he gets him down, there are going to be chances. Well, especially because Ponzinibbio likes to scramble so much. Like, his initial takedown defense is not that great. He really relies on being able to out scramble and get out of positions. Especially, like, he likes the deep half and uses that to create a scramble. I don't think you can rely on doing things like that against Gunnar Nelson.
Yeah. It's like an opportunity for a back take to me.
Yeah.
But, if I'm Pons, what I'm doing is coming into this fight and fighting against type a little bit and trying to start super fast and pressure the hell out of Gunnar Nelson and really bring the fight to him. And then, like, maybe you're not as comfortable doing that in the beginning. You get better as the fight goes on, but you'll still get more comfortable. You'll just be a little more uncomfortable to start with.
Yeah, he wants a more violent version of the Rick Story fight.
Right, yeah. And I think he could produce it. I mean, it's definitely it's not an easy fight to call for the reason that both guys have a good chance of winning.
Yeah, it would not surprise me at all if Ponzinibbio was able to do that. But I think if only for the sake of hearing both sides. Like, I guess I got to.
We need someone on this show to give Gunnar Nelson credit, and at this point I almost fear Gunnar Nelson because I feel like I can never call what is going to happen in his fights.
It's so weird, man.
Yeah, it's hard, man. I think I have a good grasp on like what he does well, but it's just whether it works or not. It's hard to determine if there even is a key factor determining whether it works or doesn't. Sometimes maybe it's just luck. It's just luck of the draw, getting the right opening at the right time, throwing the right shot at the right time, etc. How about the rest of the card? What else stands out to you? I think
super fun fights. I love the Calderwood Calvillo matchup.
Same here.
I think that's a fantastic fight. Stevie Ray versus Paul Felder is going to be fun. If a little slower paced, I think, than people are expecting. Maybe. I don't think that's going to be a war. I think it'll be a real fun 3-round striking match.
I can see that. Slower even like than a Felder Barboza or a Felder Pearson, possibly. Both guys kind of like to move around and wait and see what their opponent's going to do. I can imagine at least a very slow first round.
My personal favorite matchup on the cards, I have two favorite matchups. Khalil Roundtree versus Paul Craig.
Yeah.
I am still a Khalil Roundtree believer, and Paul Craig is, like, if Craig gets him down, he can probably submit him or grind him out. But I think Roundtree is just going to absolutely murder him on the feet.
Yeah. Neil Seery finally gets his retirement fight on the undercard.
Against Pantoja. That is a great matchup. Yeah. That is such a fun freaking matchup.
Yeah, a tough fight, but a winnable one for Seery. One that I think may have a chance to bring the best out of both guys. I'm also particularly excited about seeing more of Brett Johns. I think.
Yeah, against Albert Morales too. That's a really good fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might end up being a fairly favorable matchup for Johns as long as he can get his grappling going. But Morales is very tough and he hits really hard. And adapts
good
pretty
takedown
well.
Defense too. He's not a bad defensive wrestler.
No, he's not. He's a pretty good offensive wrestler. He's actually, I think, more of his finishes come from submission than knockout.
Yeah, he's. I think Johns is going to have trouble with Morales' athleticism. Like, Johns is a really good, complete fighter. He's got good skills, but I think he's not physically on the level of a guy like Morales.
Really?
So Johns is going to have to be. Yeah, I think Morales is an extraordinary physical specimen.
Yeah, I think of Johns as being a pretty relentless kind of athlete, though. He's very strong, I think, and I think he can.
He's strong, but he's not explosive.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But he can put out a lot of energy for a long time. He's got remarkable stamina considering the pace he likes to keep and how many takedowns he's happy to shoot over and over.
He's also pretty young, and I think he still has a little ways to go before he hits his true athletic peak.
Sure.
So maybe there's that. But, okay, this is a fight that nobody is going to care about until it happens, but Danny Roberts versus Bobby Nash is
I care about that fight.
Wild and weird.
It's going to be beautiful. Fun. I think it's going to be so much fun. Two big punching, like, long-distance boxers. It's going to be a blast.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun fight. So keep your eyes on those ones. I just figured that one would probably be flying under the radar a little bit.
Yeah.
So lots to like about this, man.
Yeah, those are my favorite ones, man. Flying under the radar. I'm such a hipster. I just have to – as soon as I realize that nobody else will care, I'm like, ooh. This fight is more interesting than you might think, and here's my BuzzFeed think piece about it. Okay, that's our episode for today. Romero Whittaker, beautiful, beautiful combat. Gaethje Johnson, beautiful in a very different and more violent way. Both, I think, Pat, you were saying before, both kind of represent two different peaks of how good MMA can get.
Way, way, way different, polar opposite sides of MMA, but both of them encapsulate something really important about what makes this sport awesome.
Yeah, and I did, and you also did say, you made your point before, right, about how this is the fight that Whittaker Romero is the fight that Thompson Woodley should have been.
Yeah, basically,
or could have been.
It was, yeah, I mean, could have been, but just wasn't, because neither of the Romero is not Woodley and Whittaker is not Thompson.
Yeah.
I think they're both just way more adaptable and way more flexible. And this fight ended up being everything that other one could have been had either guy fought a little looser, you know?
Yeah, and it seemed also
like that kind of adaptability.
Both guys were a little less precious about their own skins. You know, like the Woodley Thompson fight, you always get the sense like oh, I'll do this, but what if he does this? You know, what if there's a lot of apprehension, and there was some of that here, as much as there should be in a tactical fight. But when both guys knew they needed to go for it, they went for it. So yeah, there's nothing to hate about this performance. It was the perfect tactical, careful, strategically brilliant fight. I think it was a beautiful performance, and the fact that Whittaker did it through injury and that Romero, to me, looked like he was in great form and a really stiff challenge. It was just utterly satisfying. Can't say anything but the same for different reasons, of course, but Gaethje Johnson, scintillating debut from Justin Gaethje, gives us fans of the highlight hope that he can continue to forge ahead and actually make some headway and maybe do something truly great in the UFC. He has a very special quality about him as well. And we enjoyed watching him. We hope you guys enjoyed watching him, and we hope you enjoyed hearing us talk about him. Go ahead and check out that piece that I mentioned on Bloody Elbow. I'm going to have another one coming out at some point this week about the Whittaker fight. I want to talk I want to do a sort of a combination narrative and, kind of talk about the romance of the fight and also look at some of the technical tricks that Whittaker used to beat Romero. And I think that's probably going to be it for me this week. I'm still working on that Jim Miller interview, which I think is still will be quite poignant now that he's fought Pettis and lost. I think that's part of the story of what makes someone uniquely fascinating as a journeyman, is that you have to see somebody combat adversity in different ways than people who are like really athletically gifted have to combat adversity. And that's the story of Jim Miller, the king of the journeyman. Pat, what about you? What do you got coming out this week?
Not a whole lot. I'm just gearing up because next week my new show drops. 2 episodes on July 20th.
Do we have a title for it yet?
Tides of History.
I'm not sure if we've said it on the show before. I didn't want to.
I don't think I have.
I didn't want to blurt it. I didn't want to blurt it out in case it was secret. But the Tides of History is quite a name.
Yeah, Tides of History. There's a great quote from the French historian Fernand Braudel, who's a big-time structuralist, that like events and people are just the foam on top of the waves being carried by the deeper tides of history.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a cool little quote. But yeah, so I've been working like crazy on that. I recorded the first 2 episodes. They're ready to go. I've got a trailer that I'm going to drop here pretty soon. The feed for it should be up shortly. I'm not sure when the feed goes up, but when it does, I'll share it.
Cool.
So y'all can subscribe.
Yeah, we'll be looking forward to it. And we are looking forward to hearing from you guys. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, get at us on social media. You can find Pat at Patrick_Wyman. I am at BoxingBush, BUSCH, on Twitter. Check our work out. Bloody Elbow for me, Sherdog previews. Pat's got the work on Deadspin and the podcasts. And we appreciate you guys' support. Check us out on Patreon. Lots of good stuff over there. Blah, blah, blah. Once again, Pat, showing my inability to wrap up a show as well as I can introduce it. I've caused some terrible imbalance in myself by trying to be more interesting with my intros. I have officially killed my ability, which is already not strong to begin with, to close a show. But that's the last point I'm going to make. If you guys came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. Whew.